Hello friends, Pastor Vladis here, and we continue studying the Gospel of John. Today we're going to cover two verses from chapter 1, verses 15 and 16. John testified about him and cried out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me.' For of his fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace." All right, John, the author of this gospel, continues writing about the testimony of John, the other John. Remember, he was writing about John up here. In verse 6, it says, "There came a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify about the light." Okay? So this is the John that John, the author of this gospel, is writing about in verse 15. So this is John, and remember the word testimony, testify, to testify about the light, to bear witness about the light, and so on and so forth. And again, this is the key phrase. John testified about him. About whom? About the Word. About his encounter with the Word. He said he testified about him and cried out. Why would he cry out? Well, it was his declaration, and his testimony was out loud, and he said, "This was he of whom I said, I, John." And what did he say about the Word? "He who comes after me has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me." Let's highlight this "I" in reference to John, and also "me," which also refers to John. So John, who bears witness about the light, is saying this. So this is his phrase. He's kind of quoting himself, saying, "This was he of whom I said." There was a point when he said, "He who comes after me has a higher rank than I, John, for he existed before me." He, the Word, existed before John. By the way, if we read the other three Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we will figure out that this John, he was the cousin of Jesus Christ. And John was 6 months older than Jesus. Yet here, John says that he existed before me. So apparently John had a revelation, and we'll find out later in this chapter that he did, that the Word, who eventually became flesh and who eventually became a cousin of John, who was born 6 months later than John, that Word existed before John. We understand that he's talking about himself. How is it possible? So John apparently had a revelation, as I said, that the Word existed before him. In other words, he existed because he was eternal, everlasting. And verse 16 starts with the conjunction "for," and the conjunction "for" represents the reason for what has been said above this sentence that starts with the conjunction "for." He says, "Of his fullness." Whose fullness? John's fullness? No, the fullness of the Word. It says, "We have all received, and grace upon grace." Notice the word grace is repeated again and again here, and apparently this word is a key word. Look, verse 14 that we studied last time, it says, "He was the only begotten from the Father," the Word that is, "full of grace and truth." And it says here, "Of his fullness we have received grace upon grace." So grace, in this case, again, the undeserved favor of God towards his creation, towards people, came from his fullness. And the word fullness means that there's no lack of anything in the eternal Word. There's completeness, there's abundance, there's plenty of grace, and there's no deficit of grace in the eternal Word. And John says, of his fullness we all have received grace upon grace. And remember, the verb received is also one of the key verbs in this chapter. Remember, to those who received him, he gave the right to become the children of God. And in this case, he says, we all received grace upon grace. Why does he say all? Because grace is available to all the people in the world. There is not a single person who is excluded from the abundance of grace that is in our God. And think about it, grace upon grace. In other translations, it says grace for grace, which means this grace is so abundant that there's like piles of grace. If you can imagine grace as something of substance, something tangible, just imagine grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. It keeps piling up. In other words, there is no deficit, as I said before. There is fullness from which we have all received grace upon grace. There is no lack of God's favor to his creation. So to sum up these two verses, John, the author of the gospel, talks about the other John, the witness about the light, about the word. And he quotes his testimony in the first person on behalf of John, the witness. He says that the word was the one of whom I said that he has a higher rank than I. Higher rank for or because he existed before me. Although the word that became flesh was physically 6 months younger than John, the witness, John says that he was older than me, higher than me in terms of rank, because he existed before me. Alright guys, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, leave comments, leave your questions under this video, and if you're not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe, click the bell button so you could receive notifications every time I post a new video.